Battle rages, it's a war for souls. People are dying, they don't even know. Take a look around, no love, no hope. We have to tell them, we have to go. Raise your hand if you're ready to fight. Raise your voice if it starts tonight. Raise your banner and raise it high. Come on, come on, it's time to testify. It's time to testify. Who's gonna testify? For those who've gone out, the ones gone before. For those willing to give it their all. Called to rise up, called to carry their torch. We're called to lay down our lives for the world. Raise your hand if you're ready to fight. Raise your voice if it starts tonight. Raise your banner and raise it high. Come on, come on, come on, it's time to testify. It's time to testify. Who's gonna? We have to stand up, we have to fight. We are the answer, we are the light. I wanna find out how will they know if we don't tell them. Raise your hand if you're ready to fight. Raise your voice, it starts tonight. Raise your banner and raise it high. Come on, come on. Raise your hand if you're ready to fight. Raise your voice if it starts tonight. Raise your banner and raise it high. Come on, come on, come on. It's time to testify. It's time to testify. Who's gonna testify?
In Matthew 25, Jesus tells several parables about judgment and eternity. One of these speaks about the nations or the Gentiles. In this passage, however, Jesus gives us a glimpse into his heart, and in it we can learn something critically important about our relationship with him. Matthew 25:31 through 40 says, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, 'Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you as a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?' And the king will answer and say to them, 'Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me.'" Here Jesus is describing not only a future event, but a principle that we need to understand. The scripture tells us that God is going to separate people into two groups. Our text uses the words sheep and goats, which signifies honor and dishonor. A better picture of this has to do with relationship. This is a picture of our King making a public proclamation about the nature of humanity's relationship with him. But what is fascinating about this great judgment is not just the fact that God is making a distinction between people, but the standard by which that distinction is made. Verse 35, "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink." To simplify the passage, the essence of it is about how people treat the least of these. Jesus says to them, "Come into glory because you have had compassion on those who were hurting." Now there is a critical distinction that needs to be made. On one hand, the gospel of Jesus Christ and this story should never be misconstrued as ammunition for a social justice campaign. To make the gospel about a social campaign or simply food and clothing actually cheapens not only the message of Jesus, but the sacrifice of the cross. On the other hand, in our text, Jesus is plainly connecting ministry to people on the fringes to the very heart of Christianity. In our scripture, Jesus literally says, "How you minister to the least of these reflects your relationship with me." In verse 40, "I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." Consider what this actually means. In a very real sense, it means that our love for God is most accurately reflected in how we are willing to care for and minister to the least of these. The word "inasmuch" is better translated as "to the degree." The verse could say, "To the degree that you minister to the broken, you have ministered to me." So consider this in a practical sense. Isn't this actually describing the heart of ministry? "I was hungry, and you fed me." John 6:35, Jesus said, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger." How better can we feed the hungry than with the gospel of Jesus Christ? "I was thirsty, and you gave me drink." John 7:37, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink." Again, the gospel is the answer. So here we see the call of every believer, and of our fellowship in particular, to give ourselves to bring the gospel to the least of these. We are surrounded by people that are desperately in need of miracle help. Sometimes it is obvious. Sometimes, however, even the desperate don't realize that they are poor, blind, and naked. But Jesus' words ought to stir every believer into action. To the extent that you minister to the least of these, you are doing it for me.
From the moment you found me, my past was erased and washed away. Brand new, you create me completely 180. I ain't changed, I'm not the same. I'm just getting started, but you know my heart is wide open and in your hands. I know I am young, but I'm not waiting on anyone to tell me who I am. You call me out, you raise me up. I'm standing on the rock and now I'm feeling steady. You love me first, I am enough. When I was born, fix, I'm no longer looking backwards. I turn around, love, now my heart is captured. My eyes fix, I'm no longer looking backwards. There's a night set afire, I can see you again. This turnaround is coming. Turn around, love, now my heart is captured. My eyes fixed, I'm no longer looking backwards. There's a night set afire, I can see you again. This turn around, love, love has got me living.
Welcome to a moment that'll never be repeated. I know you know it, I'm just making sure you see it. We're always trying to move ahead so fast. Can't see the present till it flies right past. Overthinkers got a funny way of stealing all the colors that you really should be seeing. I know it doesn't always feel that way, but look around, you see it's all okay right now. Right now. Somebody told me, take it slowly. Even if the sun goes down, the stars come out. We live in the now. Why the worry? Such a hurry. I know in the end somehow it all works out. So live in the now. Right now. Welcome to a moment that took all your life to happen. You see it start to slip away until you grab it. I did the math, you only get one chance. Don't wanna miss it while I'm making my plans. A roller coaster ride, but nothing's accidental. I see the rise and fall and call it providential. Ain't gonna argue with the give and take. All I want is to be wide awake. Somebody tell me, take it slowly. Even if the sun goes down, the stars come out. We live in the now. Why the worry? Such a hurry. I know in the end somehow it all works out. So live in the now. Right now. Right now. My way, I'm a wanderer till I find my place. I'm a wanderer. You set my sail on fire. I've been a pilgrim out on the road, one of the million looking for home. I've been a pilgrim. I've been a pilgrim. I've been nomadic, tell you the truth. Swimming in static, looking for you. I've been nomadic, no doubt about it. I'ma go where the spirit leads you. Ain't nobody stopping me. I'm on my way, I'm a wanderer till I find my place. I'm a wanderer. You set my sail on fire. I'm drifting ever higher. So look up, my compass in the stars, gonna guide me through
stranger. The ends of the earth, out on the edge. Farther I go, stronger I get. Finding my purpose, finding my purpose. I'ma go where the Spirit leads you. Ain't nobody stopping me. I'm on my way, I'm a wanderer. Till I find my place, I'm a wanderer. You set my sail on fire. I'm drifting ever higher. So look up, my compass in the stars, gonna guide me through this world of ours. You set my sail on fire, like a like a wanderer. I'ma go where the Spirit leads you. Ain't nobody stopping me, yeah. Till the day that you set me free, yeah. I'ma only live for what I believe. My way, I'm a wanderer. Till I find my place, I'm a wanderer. You set my sail on fire. I'm drifting ever higher. My compass in the stars, gonna guide me through this world of ours. You set my sail on fire, like a like a wanderer.
Our scripture is speaking about a group of people that is not actually defined beyond their need. They are not defined as a social class, an ethnic group, or even a subset of society. Of course, the obvious lesson here is that we can find the least of these in every corner of society, in every nation across the globe. Biblically, however, we find a theme that brings clarity to what it means to minister to the least of these. Throughout Scripture, we often read about strangers, visitors, and foreigners, and more specifically, we read about the heart of God for them. In the book of Ruth, where we see Boaz as a type or a representation of Christ, his compassion is stirred for her, and she says to him, Ruth 2, verse 10, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" In the New Testament, Jesus puts a finer point on it in the parable of the Good Samaritan when he asks the religious to consider who was a true neighbor. Now, in their culture, the idea of neighbor was much closer to a fellow countryman than merely someone living nearby. Jesus scandalized them by suggesting that a despised Samaritan made himself a neighbor or a countryman to this injured Hebrew man by the simple act of caring for him. Jesus is actually saying that compassion makes countrymen. But consider the larger lesson here, that true godliness is most accurately reflected in how we choose to minister to those who are unlike us and who are difficult to reach. In verses 33 through 35 again, "And he will set the sheep on his right hand. Then he will say to those on his right hand, 'Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food.'" And if you consider Scripture as a whole, you must come to the conclusion that God's heart has always been tender toward the foreigner. From the Old Testament stories of Rahab and Ruth to Paul's New Testament ministry across Asia, we see the thrilling truth that the message of redemption was always meant to reach every nation and people group. When God appeared to Peter on the rooftop and challenged his entire concept of what was clean and unclean, God wasn't only assigning an outreach task, he was revealing his heart. When Paul, the Hebrew of Hebrews, proclaimed in Romans that he was an apostle to the Gentiles, he was again revealing something important about the heart of God. So back in our text, Jesus makes this statement in verse 40, "Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." Remember who he's speaking to. This was an overwhelmingly Jewish audience. In their minds, the one group of people that most readily fit the description of the least of these was the foreigner. To the Jewish mind, even for converted Jews, they struggled with Jesus' insistence on talking to and ministering to foreign people. Even his disciples ignored the Samaritan woman in John 4. So consider what this scripture is really saying to us. Jesus tells this story, and I'll paraphrase. "In the coming judgment, I will separate the accepted from the rejected. And when I do, I will tell those that enter into glory, thank you for ministering to me. Thank you for bringing the hope of the gospel to me. Thank you for caring for me." And the righteous will say, "But this doesn't make sense. How could we possibly have brought the gospel to you?" And Jesus will reply, "To the same extent that you gave the bread of life to foreigners, you ministered to me." See, the real lesson of our text is that our heart for God is most accurately revealed by our attitude toward world evangelism. And Jesus makes this profound declaration that ministering to the least is actually indistinguishable from ministering to Jesus himself. Every time you invest in world evangelism, Jesus says, "I was hungry and you gave me food." Every time a couple leaves their home to pioneer, Jesus responds, "I was thirsty and you gave me a drink." Every time we lay aside our personal desires to reach a desperate people, Jesus proclaims, "I was naked and you clothed me, and in prison and you visited me." And one day we will all stand before Jesus, and he will point to the nations, the tribes, and the peoples of the earth that have been redeemed, and he will say to his flock, "Inasmuch as you did it for the least of these, you did it for me."
Change your plans. We ask him to heal, but won't step on the land. Who can he send if he won't even stand and say, "Send me"? Here I am, here's my life, here's my plans. Any people, any land, I give it all into your hands.
Can you see the least of these? He's in the weak, he's in the broken.
Jesus in the least of these.
He's in the widow, he's in the orphan.